All right, everybody, thank you for joining me. My name is Ryan Stauffer, and I'm a naturalist with the Audubon Society of Western Pennsylvania. This is part one of three. We're going to be looking today about the interactions and the origins of birds, especially jays and oaks, and how they spread around the world. The next one in the series is going to be looking at insects specifically. Then the third one is going to be looking at the role of fungus in oak trees. So this is we're going to touch on some important topics here, and a lot of this is based on the work of lots of different people. Um, I know that some people might have some disagreements with me on my perspectives here. That's okay. Um, But if you want to talk more about it, my email is going to be at the end of this, and so that I can address any concerns that you have. I'm still letting some people into the waiting room here. So I'm going to try to stay focused on oaks and birds, especially jays. Um, I'll mention a little bit about insects towards the end, but I'm going to leave that more to our staff entomologist, Nelson Milano, who will be exploring that in our next series. This is not an oak tree ID program. If you want to brush up on your local oaks, you can come to any of our free nature hikes that we offer at all of our locations weekly. I work at Suck Up Nature Park, and our morning hike is Thursday at 9 a.m. And I'd be happy to show you some really cool oak tree specimens that we have. We have 9 species there that you can observe. Um, so lots of birds rely on oaks for nesting sites, food, shelter, cover. But jays have the closest relationship with oaks. And I just don't mean our local blue jays. I mean our uh, all all of the jays. Ooh, I got some more people in the waiting room here. I'm going to let in. Um, all around the world, wherever we find oak trees, we find jay species, and they have a very close evolutionary relationship. And if it weren't for the jays that we have, our forests would be vastly different than they are right now. So I'll touch on a couple of the reasons for that. So I want the main points here that birds, especially jays, are vital to functioning ecosystems. And later on, I'm going to try to make a case to you that our policy of fire suppression is working against uh, the support of our oak trees, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Oop, here's Sue joining. We still have some people that are coming in, so again, I'm trying to do double duty here, monitoring the waiting room as well as get the program going. So So if you're new to Audubon, I see a lot of names here that I'm familiar with. Please use us as an organization. Please, come to programs, visit our sites. You can come out to Beechwood Farms, Buffalo Creek Nature Park, Todd Nature Reserve. I'm out at Suckup. If you want to come and say hi, please do. Sorry, I'm letting a couple more people in. Hopefully we can get this going. All right, so oaks are a tree in the genus Quercus, and this is a long-lived tree. They can live hundreds of years, and so one single oak tree can make many millions of acorns throughout its lifetime. I want us to remember that oaks are fire adapted, not for really high intense fires, but for low to moderate intensity. They're adapted, and because of those adaptations, they kind of suffer from extreme fire suppression. Oaks are not shade tolerant. They need a lot of sun, especially whenever they're young saplings, to be able to grow. Whereas other tree species like maples are shade tolerant. And if you have a maple tree that's growing out in full sun, young saplings can scald in the sun. So whenever it comes to shade tolerance, oaks and maples are kind of on diametrically opposed from one another. Unlike most of our other trees out there, oaks are wind pollinated. We'll explore that a little bit more, a little bit. And of course, is it an oak tree? Well, does it make acorns? If it makes acorns, then it is an oak tree. Oaks are, of course, deciduous, losing their leaves in the wintertime. And oaks have a massive range. We find them on many different continents, obviously not Antarctica, but we find them from temperate zones and boreal zones, even down into some tropical zones as well. And around here in Western Pennsylvania, oaks support many animal species. I feel like everyone eats them. You know, if you're a deer or a turkey or birds, squirrels, chipmunks, of course, they are a keystone species because they provide that food for lots of different species. Oaks can hybridize because they're wind pollinated. They're not quite as advanced as some of our animal pollinated uh, trees out there. And if you go out to Preston Park in Butler, Pennsylvania, they have a cross between a liana oak that's a cross between a black oak and a shingle oak, and it's mature. Um, Oops, somebody else just came into the waiting room. Let me let them in. So the fact that oaks can hybridize, that also increases their potential for speciation. You know, whenever we have groups of oaks that are living in an area, if that suddenly becomes isolated and there's enough selection pressures, then that group of oaks can become an entirely new species. So Quercus as a genus is in the beech family, and beech has 8 genera, of which Quercus is one. There are about 435. I've seen some places put it at 450 plus species of oak worldwide. I'm going to be a little bit more conservative and go on the lower end of that. But the beech family also includes our, of course, our beech trees, but also our chestnut trees as well. So oaks first came about around 50 million years ago during the Middle Eocene. And here I have a map of the world that kind of showing you where the continents are, and we can see that the continents are close to their current locations. India is about to slam into the Himalayan mountains. We can see Australia is a lot closer to Antarctica. We can see that Europe is basically a large island that's in the middle of a shallow sea. North America is surrounded by warm, shallow seas as well. And during this time period, there are some switches that go around. But so this is the Earth 50 million years ago. Just for fun, let's go back in time 300 million years ago. And the reason I do that is because this is the Carboniferous period. This is the time when the plants that make up our coal deposits here in Pennsylvania were growing and going full steam. You basically have a supercontinent. All the continents are pushed together. And I put a little red star there. That's roughly where Pennsylvania is, or the land that we now call Pennsylvania. It was south of the equator, and it was kind of in the middle of this large supercontinent. And this began to break up and switch. During this time period, um, you know, we have a lot of plant growth. The planet was a lot warmer. By the time we hit the Eocene, this time period was a transition from a very warm, hot Earth to one that was much cooler. So the global temperature drops down. We have areas that are tropical and subtropical are now becoming Arctic at this time uh, around the shores of what we call Antarctica now. There were tropical forests growing. But as the planet cools, deciduous trees start to overtake those tropical evergreens. Oh, someone in the chat here. Okay, someone is asking me in the chat. I don't know if it's just my connection. I don't see the presentation, just your camera. So I'm showing some pictures here. I'm hoping that that people can see the presentation that I'm doing. Listen, if any of you are having an issue with connectivity, this is being recorded to the cloud, and it will be on YouTube within a couple of weeks. So if something's happening and you need to check out or check back in, I'll try to keep monitoring the waiting room here as well. So oaks come about at a time period when the Earth is cooling down big time. And this didn't happen overnight. We're talking millions of years, but there were developing selection pressures for cold tolerance in plants. And someone else just came in. Let me let them in. All right, thanks. Some people are letting me know that they can see the slides and hear everything, so thank you very much. So, of course, oak trees make acorns. And I'm sure you've all played with acorns. My wife loves acorns, so anytime I see a little piece of acorn jewelry or something like that, I try to get it for her. People have been fascinated by acorns. We're all familiar with them. So let's imagine an acorn in our head. No hard shell like a hickory nut, or more extreme example would be like an eastern black walnut. It's not a tiny seed like an apple seed that would pass through digestion. So if something is eating an acorn, that acorn is not sprouting. That acorn's genes are out of the gene pool. Acorns are like little vitamins, nutritious sources, fat, protein, carbs, and they support lots of different animals. So I don't want to give you the impression like jays are the only bird out there that's enjoying acorns. Turkeys love them, ducks, towhees, lots of different species enjoy eating acorns and rely on them. So when we think about that nutrition, fats in winter are key. If you're going to be an animal that's going to be putting on weight like a bear, going into hibernation, acorns are going to be critical to get that fat. Whenever birds are out there, that fat assists in their very high metabolism that allows them to be able to beat the winter cold. Acorns don't come off of a tree in dependable regular numbers. It's not like an oak tree of a certain size will yield this many acorns each year. And sometimes those trees are 15, 16, 17 years old before they even begin to yield acorns. But when they do, it's been shown through studies that acorns, whenever an oak tree creates a lot of acorns in a single year, we say that that is a masting year. And we know that these trees mast in cycles. They don't make the same amount of acorns each year. Those mast cycles are somewhere between 2 and 5 years. And they're synchronized. So that means that a group of oaks in any given part of a forest that are in proximity with each other will synchronize their masting cycles. So there'll be years where I'm sure you've seen years where if you have oaks in your yard, it's just like ball bearings everywhere. And whenever we get into part 3 of this series, Chris is going to talk a little bit more about how those oaks can communicate with each other and able to synchronize their masting cycles. This is going to affect population dynamics, meaning all those creatures that love to eat acorns, if they have a lot of acorns to eat, they are going to successfully reproduce and their populations are going to go up. But if those acorns aren't there, they're not going to be able to reproduce as much and populations can go down. So those masting cycles affect population dynamics of multiple animal species. As I said before, lots of creatures out there depend on them. So when I say undependable yields, I mean that in the sense that acorn eaters cannot rely on consistent high yields year after year. There's going to be years where that tree puts that massive amount of energy into making its mast. And all mast is just a nut crop. So hickory nuts and chestnuts, those on the ground, we call those mast as well. To do this, it takes a lot of energy for the trees. And you can see it on tree rings. If you find an oak log, you can look at tree rings. They're going to be slim in those mast years because instead of putting energy into more growth of the tree's body, it goes into acorn production. So why intermittently mast? Why not just produce an average yield each year, year after year? From a reproductive strategy, you might think like, yeah, just instead of just putting all my energy every 2 to 5 years into making this massive crop, why not just make a moderate amount? And we don't know, but that's still something that is being studied. We're not sure. Some of the theories out there is that imagine if you have a group of oak trees and they all make acorns. There's going to be too many acorns for all of those creatures to eat. There's going to be some left over. Some are going to be left to sprout. So one theory is predator satiation. Those oak trees obviously don't have consciousness the way that we do, but I say that plants definitely react to stimuli and they definitely make decisions. They might not think the way we do, but they definitely are participants in that ecosystem, especially with the decisions that they make. So the idea being oak trees make so much mast that predators can't eat it all. The other side, another line of thought to this would be if all the trees mast, that means all those predators that love to eat the acorns, they're going to have all the food they want and they are going to reproduce big time. Their populations are going to go up, up, up. But then the next year, when the trees don't mast, all those predators that are freshly born are going to starve because there's not going to be enough acorns to support that increased predator population. So it's almost as if the oak trees in this theory are tricking the predators into over reproducing so that the next few years there's less predators. Another theory. But we have to remember that masting and any acorn production begins in the spring. It begins with pollination. And if you have a lot of trees that are putting out lots of pollen, and remember for each acorn there has to be a flower that's pollinated for that to grow into that acorn. In the springtime, that might increase effective pollination because there's lots more pollen out there in the air. And remember that oaks are wind pollinated. They don't rely on an insect pollinator. So maybe by having masting years, that creates more effective pollination. And speaking of pollination, here's a picture of some oak catkins, the male flowers. They hang down in those little green, almost looks like little maybe marbles on a string. And they're very easy to see in the springtime. If you have oak trees around, these will be hanging down and the wind is blowing this pollen. So there's clouds of pollen that are going around. And I like to think of this as the message in a bottle style of pollination. I'm going to put a message in a bottle, toss it out there into the ocean, and I hope it gets somewhere. I don't know if it ever does, but hopefully it'll get somewhere. And that's kind of what this is. The oaks are going to put so much pollen into the atmosphere, it blows around, and the more pollen that's blowing around, the more of a chance that those pollen grains are going to land on a female flower and pollinate it. So here are some pictures I took last spring, and there's a redbud, a northern catalpa, and a crabapple. These trees are obviously insect pollinated. They have highly developed flowers that have visual and chemical sense that are trying to attract an insect pollinator. So this is more like a instead of a message in a bottle type of strategy. This is like having a FedEx driver that's taking the pollen right from one flower right to the other flower where it needs to go. So oaks don't do that. But wind pollination can be a little bit sketchy. And by sketchy, I mean it's not as effective as having an insect pollinator. I'm sure many of you have seen tiny little deformed acorns on the ground in the fall, kind of like the ones in this picture. If a tree pollinates itself, if wind blows that pollen back onto a female flower and it pollinates itself, oftentimes it will abort that acorn. It's not going to put the energy into producing a nice, well-formed acorn because that acorn is basically inbred and it wants, wants that vigor that it gets from having another individual's pollen of the same species come. So wind pollination can be sketchy, but oaks have been doing it for 50 million years, so it must be effective enough that oaks are still with us. So the male flowers are pretty easy to see. They again hang down in clusters. The female flowers can be trickier to find. They're usually among the leaf clusters of those new growing leaves. So this is something to look for in April and May. Should be able to locate the male flowers pretty easy, but if you can pull a branch down, it might be fun for you to try to search out the female flowers as well. But even in non-masting years, oaks produce more nut mass than all the other trees combined. So even in non-masting years, they are still critically important to those ecosystems because they just provide so much food. So here we have the cross section of an acorn. So the what we call a cap, the cupule, is where the acorn grows out of, and we have two cotyledons in there. So that's oak trees are dicots, and those cotyledons hold most of that fat and protein and carbs, and that energy is meant for the growing embryo. So an embryo is just a living, tiny little oak tree, and it's in that acorn, and the cotyledons give it energy to boost its growth. And right at the tip here, though, we have what's the remains of the style, and that is the tube that the pollen goes down into the ovary of the flower for it to be pollinated. So this little remains of the style, we could call it a nub or an acorn tip. I'm not even sure if it has an official name. Maybe I should look that up. But the remains of that style makes that little nub at the bottom of acorns. And all of them have it. Some it's a little bit more pronounced than others. If we look really closely at the beak of a blue jay, just at the tip, it angles down a few degrees. And this is perfectly adapted for that beak to grab on to that nub on the acorn and strip the pericarp off so that it can get to those nutritious cotyledons inside. So jays have been around oaks for much less time than oaks have been here, but jays and oaks definitely have co-evolved with one another. So jays belong to a group of birds called corvids, and that includes our ravens and our crows as well. And corvids came about 17 million years ago, and we find them on most of the continents, not Antarctica. And as a group, corvids are very intelligent. They're problem-solving birds. They can be aggressive. And we can break them into two groups, what we call Old World, meaning from Europe and Asia and Africa, and then our New World that are mainly from North America. And they're very aware birds. They keep a keen eye open, and they will call out alarms whenever they see any kind of threat. And this also benefits a lot of other passerine birds. So jays not only serve, I think of them as kind of like the watchdogs of the forest. Whenever you go into a forest, probably the first calls you're going to hear are going to be blue jay alarm calls, and that's alerting other jays in the area, but also other birds that, hey, there's a potential threat here. So the oaks have been with us for about 50 million years. They arrive in the land that will be called North America about 30 million years ago. So there's a long history of oaks, both in what we call I don't like the old and new world. It's kind of an outdated term. I should find something else to use. But their populations were more isolated. So we had oaks here millions of years ago in North America, but before the jays got here, the population's more isolated, and they didn't spread really quickly until the jays came about. So if you've ever spent any time birding, you'd notice that jays are loud birds. So whenever it comes to blue jays, we have a few different types of calls here, and these are categorized by Donald Kreutzma, who's a famous ornithologist. So first up, we have the jeers. Jeer calls are not musical. They are loud, they're brash, they are a warning, an alarm. They denote a high priority threat, like a bird of prey, like a hawk or an owl. And just from observing blue jays in the field, I can say with confidence that they do not like birds of prey. They do not like hawks. They don't like those smaller accipiters or owls. They will mob them. They will gang up on them and try to push them out of their territory if they see them. So we could think of the jeer as like a rally call for other jays. Hey, let's get ready to mob. Something's coming in here. Let's take care of it. Pump handle calls are called that because I might be one of the few people with this experience, but my grandfather had a hand pump well where we get drinking water from, and whenever it hasn't been used for a few hours, it squeaks. Ear, ear. So pump handle calls are kind of like smooth, they're clear, they're clean, and they have a uh, whistle-like tone to them. And those are only given in flight, and it's kind of like a low priority threat, kind of like a hey, check this out, will you? Then we have our rattle calls. Rattle calls are made by females only, and these are quick, loud clacks or clicks. They're usually sounded within a flock, and they're another form of alert. And they're used to whenever another jay enters a mating pair's territory. Sometimes the rattle call will go. A female will give a rattle. And we have intra-pair calls. These are between mates. These are quieter and a little bit more, they probably have a lot to do with pair bonding. They're done during activities like nest building, foraging, things like that. This also includes begging calls of young. We include those in intra-pair calls. And also, blue jays, well, all jays, but our local blue jays as well, are very good mimics. They can mimic other birds. I've heard them do red-tail hawks, red-shouldered hawks. They can even do human created sounds. They can mimic beeps and cell phones and doorbells, things like that. So they are excellent mimics, and we're still not sure exactly why they mimic. That might be showing off to a mate. Like, look how smart I am. Look at all these calls I can do. They may find a cool food source and then mimic a hawk call to scare other jays away so that they can enjoy that food source. But even whenever they do a hawk screech, those are usually just variations on jeers and pump handle calls. Whenever they do a screech owl mimic, that's usually a variation of intra-pair calls. So suffice to say, jays have highly developed vocalization. So old world and new world jays. The old world jay that is the most common, the most likely to see if you head over to Europe is the Eurasian jay, and you can see its range there. It goes from Southeast Asia all across Russia, all over Europe, even into North Africa. So that's one of the most common ones that we see in the old world. When it comes to New World jays, we have our local blue jay, and the only other jay that we have that's in the same genus as the blue jay is the Steller's jay. And those are both New World jays. Those are crested. So whenever we look at blue jay range, it can go coast to coast, but it's mainly centered in the east. Steller's jay is more west and north, and their ranges do overlap in some of the central mountainous states. For instance, if you were in Colorado, it wouldn't be, I wouldn't be surprised to hear you say that you saw a Steller's jay and a blue jay. I want us to remember these range maps. So Steller's jay, western, blue jay, eastern. We also have scrub jays. There are 7 species in North America. These are really new. They developed during the Pleistocene, which started about 2.5 million years ago and ended about 12,000 years ago. So these are our newest jays. Other New World jays include our pinion jays, magpie jays, tropical jays, southern mountain jays, and the Cyanolyca also includes some magpie jays. Again, I'm not going to get too far into this because I want to kind of keep this as local as I can, but I want to be very clear that we have lots of different jays all over the world. Old world jays, the Eurasian jay is one of 3 species in the genus Garrulus. They have 4 species of ground jays, and there's 1 species of an Antilostomus, which looks more like a crow, and that's found in Africa. But then we get to this one. I call it both worlds jay. because in the Parasaurus genus, we find Parasaurus jays in North America and Asia. And the one that we're most likely to see in North America, probably not in Pennsylvania, maybe in an eruptive year, it might be possible, but the Canada jay is a little bit farther north. And it has lots of different names: camp robber, whiskey jack, gray jay, Canada jay, you name it. And they are very good little thieves. All right. So Canada jays, let's look at their range. The reason they call them camp robbers is because they go right in. They'll take food out of people's hands. So let's look at this range again into Colorado. You might be able to see a a Canada jay, a Steller's jay, and a blue jay, but it's mainly a northern boreal species. This just past summer, Chris and I led a birding trip to Newfoundland, which is on the extreme right of this map, and we found 89 species of birds. But of the two that we really expected to see, were puffins and Canada jays, we didn't see any. And we asked some of the locals about this and like, how do we see Canada jays? They're like, just go outside, like hold a cracker or a piece of bread. They'll come and take it right out of your hand. We tried this. Unfortunately, it didn't work, but we're going back to Newfoundland this summer. So I'm confident that we'll be able to get our puffins and Canada jays as well. But back to our local jay. We only have one jay in our area in Western Pennsylvania. That's our beautiful blue jay. So when it comes to our blue jays, they are scatter hoarders as opposed to larder hoarders. So scatter hoarders will take food and they make many, many small caches. So when a jay is caching acorns, hiding them for later use, they're only putting 1 to 3 acorns and they bury them in the ground, but they're doing this at many, many, many different places. Whereas squirrels tend to be larder hoarders. They're going to hoard up acorns into one large area that's singular. They are also very selective, meaning if there's a worm or a weevil larva that's inside of an acorn, they tend to leave that alone. Blue jays can establish long distance caches. It all depends on the condition that they find themselves in. If they have oak trees that they're gathering from, and there are open spaces, especially successional field habitat, they're going to go out into those more open places and hide their acorns. A jay cannot locate an acorn unless it put it there itself or it saw another jay put an acorn there. It can't just go out and locate another jay's hoard, let's say. Now, if there's some open space right next to the oak within a few meters, it can utilize that. They usually go about 100 meters, but they've also been known to go very long distances, over a mile. And because they prefer early successional forests to mature ones where they hide their acorns, those acorns stand the greatest chance of surviving to adulthood. So when we think about acorn selection, let's think about white oak and red oak. These are two groups of trees. So yes, there is a northern red oak and a white oak species, but those are also groups. So pin oaks and Shumard's oaks and red oaks, those belong in the red oak group. White oaks include chestnut oaks and swamp white oaks. So these are different groups. White oak acorns have less tannin in them. Tannins are bitter substance, and that's a chemical defense by the tree. So white oak acorns have less tannin, but they germinate really soon. Once they hit the ground, that embryonic root called a radicle comes out and they start growing very soon after they hit the ground while it's still fall. Whereas red oak acorns will stay dormant all winter long and they germinate in the spring. And infested acorns will not germinate, so they're out of the gene pool completely. So I get this a lot. Blue jays are mean. Oh, they're aggressive. They're attacking my birds at my feeder. So some people don't like blue jays. I'm trying to bring you all around to see blue jays as the most important bird in our area. So I say nope. Blue jays are not mean. we're tending to be a little bit anthropomorphic here. So if blue jays were people, we could describe them as large. Yep, they're larger than a lot of the other bird species that are around, but this also gives them an advantage of being able to carry more acorns. Yes, they're colorful. They don't have a strikingly different breeding or winter plumage. Yes, they are very, very loud, but again, those loud vocalizations assist other birds in identifying threats, especially birds of prey. Yes, are they aggressive? But uh, they can be, but that also allows them to survive better. They take chances. Can they be thieves? Absolutely. They can pilfer eggs. They can steal from other birds, but again, they are doing whatever it takes to survive. Are they secretive? Sometimes. When they're hiding those acorns, they don't want other jays to see where they're hiding them. And yeah, so I guess if they were people, we could be like, hey, these, they're mean. I don't like them, but they're not people, right? They're birds, and all those things that maybe we see as human traits putting on the bird. If we can think of how those traits allow that bird to be more successful, can have a little bit more appreciation for them. So blue jays, I'm going to mention this real quick, are not really blue because their coloration is not pigment based. It's structural. So there are keratins in their feathers that have different reflectance levels. And so different wavelengths are reflected off of them. So when we look at a blue jay, it has dark, light blue, and everywhere in between. But that's not really blue. That's just the light that's reflecting off of it. So it's not pigment in the feathers that's making that blue color. So that's more of like a fun tidbit than than uh, than the meat of what we're studying now. So oaks and jays, they have seed dispersal mutualism. Both the oak and the blue jay get something. Obviously, the blue jay gets food for the winter, and the oak gets some of its acorns planted. So there's a connection there. And yes, there are other creatures that can hide acorns. They might grow, but oaks rely more heavily on jays than any other creature out there to spread its genetics throughout the environment. So zoochory is a seed dispersal mechanism, and that's where animals are spreading seeds. Some examples would be when you have a burr on your clothing. All right, so that's zoochory. That's where an animal gets a seed pod attached to it. Those burrs are Velcro-like. Animal physically transports it, and it falls off somewhere else, and hopefully it's in a location where it can grow. Sometimes seeds will pass through a bird's digestive system and end up in their feces, and they could be many miles away, especially if they're migrating. Um, so without jays moving acorns away from the parent tree and planting them, they would not survive because saplings that sprout under the shade of a parent tree are doomed. Remember, oaks are shade intolerant. They are fire adapted and shade intolerant. This is going to be important in a little bit whenever we get into how they spread. So other forms of seed dispersal mechanisms include anemochory, and that's just where seeds go in the air. Think of a dandelion. When you blow on that, the seeds just blow away. Hydrochory is where water is transporting seeds from one spot to another. Think coconuts would probably be the best example of hydrochory. So blue jays have a gular pouch. This is a pouch that's in their throat where they can store acorns. So if you've ever seen a blue jay flying around with an acorn or two in its beak, it could have 3 or 4 down inside of its gular pouch. So this is a sac, and not just jays have this. The most obvious example to most people would probably be a pelican, but cormorants and frigate birds also have gular sacs or gular pouches. And this means that instead of making one trip per acorn, the blue jay can do multiple acorns in one trip. So with one load, it might have 4 to 5 acorns, and it would probably put those into 2 or 3 caches as it's scatter hoarding all over its territory. So I don't want you to think of the gular pouch as a crop. Blue jays have those. Other birds do as well. But this is on top of having a crop and a gizzard. They also have that gular pouch. So let's say that we are a blue jay and we have our acorns and we are moving them. Now, if we're in a mature forest, we don't want to hide our acorns in that mature forest. There's probably lots of other creatures watching us. We want to go a distance away. Maybe there's an early successional forest that's about a mile away. And we're going to fly over here, put the acorn down into the ground. They are buried. They're not buried deep. They're buried at a pretty uh, optimal depth for a tree to grow there. And blue jays have been known to, if they go back to a cache and the tree and a little sapling is sprouted, they've been known to rip that tree out, eat the cotyledons off the roots, and slam the tree crudely back into the ground to replant it. And sometimes the tree even survives that and they can grow. So, as I mentioned before, they disregard infested acorns. We know that they prefer red oak to white oak. And again, white oaks have less tannins, so they're more palatable, but they start growing as soon as they're in the ground. So the cache is between 3 to 5, maybe a little more. And jays forget roughly about 25% of the acorns that they cache. So that means if they cache 4,000 acorns, they've potentially planted 1,000 trees. And of course, not all 1,000 of those acorns are going to grow up to maturity, but them's good odds. So in that respect, jays can move forests. If there is some sort of environmental catastrophe like mass wasting, a landslide, you name it, anything that kind of resets the ground, jays are usually the first ones to bring forests back into those damaged areas. So squirrels do plant acorns as well. Squirrels tend to keep them all in one spot, or maybe have they have much fewer larders than the blue jays do, and they will bite off the tops of acorns. They'll usually eat the acorn from the top down, and often after they've chewed on an acorn, it's not going to be viable in order to sprout. So yes, they plant acorns, but not nearly as many as jays. Jays are the stars whenever it comes to who spreads the oaks around. So Pennsylvania. I was taught that Pennsylvania is a northern state when I was a kid. Now I put that into question. That little heart is where I'm at. That's in Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania, and I'm at 41 degrees north latitude. 0 degrees is the equator, 90 degrees is the North Pole. So if we were right halfway between the equator and the North Pole, we'd be at 45 degrees, but we'd have to be out in Wyoming for that to happen. We're closer to the equator than we are the North Pole. That means that we are the northern range of a lot of southern species of plants and animals, and we're also the southern range of a lot of northern species. That's why we can see cold adapted trees and warm adapted trees right mixed up here in Western Pennsylvania. So I like to think of us as the gateway to the north and south. And for those of you that are watching this from Allegheny County, your climate is humid subtropical. Probably doesn't feel like it today, huh? But we have 4 distinct climate types within Pennsylvania. We have, a warm summer humid continental, which is most of it, but we have large areas of our state that are humid subtropical as well. Remember, we're right next to the Great Lakes. That could be thought of as large inland seas. And the other part of our state down by Philadelphia is oceanic. It's right next to the ocean. So, and with us being 4 degrees closer to the equator than we are the North Pole, we're not quite as extreme in climate as one might think. But when we look at forest maps, We see we have an Appalachian oak forest kind of dominates our state, as well as northern hardwood forests. And both of those are dominated by oak trees. They are a defining tree within that forest mix. So even though where I'm at has a different climate than where you're at, if you're in Allegheny County, we still both live in Appalachian oak forests. But just a geologic instant ago, think of geology of long, deep time, but just a few thousand years ago, I'm talking 12,000 years ago, we were ending the Pleistocene epoch. This was the time of the ice ages, and this lasted 2.5 million years until about 11,700 years ago. We had two major ice sheets that were in North America, and the Laurentide ice sheet came right into Pennsylvania, right into Butler County. In fact, where I'm sitting now, if I could rewind time 18,000 years and look behind me, I'd see a wall of ice about 1.5 miles tall. Slippery Rock was just about as far south as it got. Had some lobes that went a little bit farther south. So the reason, what does that have to do with oaks and jays? Well, I call this the Etch-a-Sketch end of the world. When you have a 1 to 2 mile thick wall of ice, it grinds everything down to bedrock. It doesn't leave any soil. There's no plants left. There's no worms underneath there. The immense pressure of that ice grinds everything down to bedrock. And now nature has to come back. How's it going to do that? Well, it has to go through ecological succession. There are different stages that it goes through. Also, with the end of the last ice age, we had the Pleistocene extinction. This is why I call it the Etch-a-Sketch end of the world in two ways. One, all life is ground off, and then the glacier retreats, and it is a virgin landscape. But we also had a lot of animals that went extinct. We had 32 genera of large mammals. They're called megafauna. The one here in the picture shows a woolly mammoth, and that's kind of like the poster child for the Ice Age. Very recognizable. Oh, it's a mammoth. You can totally see it, the big curvy tusks and everything. But we lost many, many other creatures. We define megafauna as any animal over 100 pounds. So we still have some megafauna around, deer, bear, bison, but the vast majority, in all over the world, the Pleistocene extinction is the most distinct here in North America. And whenever we look at megafauna remains, they're concentrated, the highest concentration of megafauna remains in North America by far is around the Great Lakes region. So right where we're at. Now, again, getting back to the back to the oaks, don't worry. So by 5,000 years ago, we have that climax Appalachian hardwood forest dominated by oaks. How? Well, we can thank our jays. All right. Jays move forests, as I had mentioned before. Without the jays, the oaks would have moved north very, very slowly. But with jays caching acorns over 1 mile away, that means in theory, those forests could move over 1 mile a year, and those oaks could come back in. So from 11,700 years ago, when it was Etch-a-Sketch end of the world, bare rock, by 5,000 years ago, we had a forest that if you walked in it, there'd be very large trees, but it would be familiar to you. Oh, you would recognize different species that were there, but that wouldn't have moved into our area. It would have taken much longer, probably thousands of years longer, if we hadn't had the jays there to assist the movement of that forest after the last ice age. We have lots of local oaks that we can see. Again, this isn't a program of how to ID oaks, but here are just a few examples of the many oaks that we can find in our area. So we have a lot of oak diversity. Our blue jay is very successful. There's no other jays around, only one species of jay, but we have lots of different species of oaks. And those oaks, can thank jays for spreading their genetics around our environment. If we look at oaks worldwide, about 435 species on 5 continents. And if we could take all the oaks in the world and put them on a scale, and then take all the trees in the world that are not oaks and put them on the other side of the scale, the oaks by far have way more biomass than any other trees out there. In my case, to you, and it's not just me, that something were to happen, no jays, our oaks would also eventually disappear. So whenever we look at oak species distribution worldwide, let's look at this map. This is just oaks all around. We see that they're into Southeast Asia. The Middle East has oak trees, Europe, North and Central America as well. Now let's look at the range of our most common jays, our blue jay and the Eurasian jay. They kind of follow where the oaks are. The oaks were kind of isolated in parts of the world until jays really started to carry them around. And so once jays come onto the scene, 17 million years ago is when corvids come out, we see oak species start to diversify, and not just in North America, but all over the world. So there's an article called Airlifting the Oaks. Sorry, let me get a drink of iced tea here. 50 jays transported and cached 150,000 acorns in 28 days. That's moving a forest. There you're basically taking those acorns, which are the essence of the forest, little capsules of life, spreading them out. So my case is that jays are responsible for forests. Humans are really good at fragmenting habitat. We like to create, we like to build roads. And some animals don't really care about fragmented habitat, like mice, but foxes sure do. And whenever we fragment habitat, we are making the ecosystem from any species perspective smaller. Jays consistently work to overcome this trend because they will take an oak from a mature forest, an acorn, sorry, from a mature oak forest, and take it to an area that has been cleared or that there has been human activity. Especially we see this with agricultural fields. At Suckup Nature Park where I work, most of that was cleared farmland, and farming was phased out in the 40s and 50s. And now most of the forest that we see is early successional forest, and that's prime, the prime habitat that jays like to come and hide oaks at. So oaks are in decline, but a third of their species are threatened worldwide. And this is nothing new. This has been talked about since at least the 1950s, probably earlier. They're missing from that mid-story. So, as I mentioned before multiple times, oaks are fire adapted. They can easily survive not intense wildfires, but they can easily, let me admit someone else just came in. They can tolerate those lesser, low to moderate forest fires, but they're also shade intolerant. So these two aspects of oaks make them particularly vulnerable to human activity. So anywhere we look in this feedback loop, if we look at the bottom, if there are fewer jays, what if there was a disease that targeted corvids and our jay population tanked? If it didn't recover, within a short time, we're going to see less oaks planted. And whenever there's fewer oaks, there's less acorns, fewer jays. So this just keeps going in a circle and getting worse and worse and worse. Whenever I was a kid, we were taught by Smokey the Bear, only you can prevent forest fires. So every time you go into a park, there'd be the Smokey the Bear sign with this fire danger indicator. Is it low, moderate, or high, or severe? But because oaks survive fires, in Pennsylvania, since the late 19th century, we've had an active fire suppression as policy. We don't want forest fires. We want to suppress them. We want to put them out. We want to keep them from starting. But in these mature forests, there are less oak saplings because they're shade intolerant. They don't grow in those mature forests. So allowing low intensity forest fires is good. That opens up habitat for oaks to grow. And we might think of, and I know what's going on out in California right now is devastating. And you know, and that happened as I was putting this presentation together. I'm not saying that fire suppression is bad. I'm saying forest management when it comes to fires, to not allow forest fires to become intense, to allow those light to moderate ones so that that duff on the forest floor burns up and doesn't create high intensity, would be a better direction to go in. Also, we don't think of Pennsylvania as having a lot like wildfire country. We don't have like, we don't see water bombers flying over our houses, but Pennsylvania has lots of wildfires each year. But again, if they are low, moderate intensity, it's not that big a deal. It's actually good for the oaks. That opens up places. Mature oaks can survive those fires. They have very, very thick bark. Usually their branches are pretty high, so a low intensity fire isn't, the flames aren't going to reach up to where the leaves are. Here's I just put this in as an example. We had a wildfire just a few months ago on Blue Mountain at the Lehigh Gap. And 2 months before that, Chris and I had led a birding trip to this area to Hawk Mountain. So oak decline, we could say, is, I'm saying, mostly due to human fire suppression, and I'm not trying to agitate anyone by that or throw down the gauntlet in any way. If you disagree with me, I totally respect your opinion. But again, this is still being studied. But there are other threats to our oaks. Human development, introduced species, hogs and cattle love acorns. So anytime we have a non-native species that is munching on these acorns, they're taking them out of the ecosystem where they evolved. There are some diseases that can cause problems as well. And of course, the shifting climate with changing climatic conditions, that happens too fast for oaks and jays to adapt to, that could have unforeseen consequences in the future. I'll touch on a couple diseases here. Oak wilt is deadly for red oaks. If red oaks get oak wilt, they're gone. They can be dead in weeks. White oaks, they can hang on for a few years, but it's an eventual death sentence. There's no current treatment. So if you have trees that have oak wilt, they recommend like cut them down and burn them. There's nothing you can really do. Oak wilt is a disease complex. In this case, it's a fungus that attacks the tree, and it creates situations where insects can then come in and further damage the tree. So 2 or more vectors are coming together to cause the disease. Sudden oak death, that's from an invasive umaceae. This is out on the west coast, so it's not around here, but this causes bleeding cankers that eventually end up killing the tree. Oak leaf scorch is another condition that can be exacerbated by bacteria or fungi. But there's more to the story. So again, I wanted to stay away from insect interactions because that's a whole other world in itself. So I'll just touch on it as we begin to wrap up here. Oaks by far support the most diversity of caterpillars. I say 500 plus. I read Doug Tallamy's book, The Nature of Oaks. It's mind-blowing. And then his book really brought this to my attention of just how important caterpillars are in the ecosystem, especially to bird lovers like us. So oak trees can support hundreds of species of caterpillars, especially moth caterpillars. And all these caterpillars do is eat, munch, 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 and all they eat are oak leaves. So Tallamy made the case that caterpillars are just transformed oak leaves. And then he went further with that line of thought and said, because baby birds exist almost exclusively on moth caterpillars, baby birds are made from oak leaves. And I can follow that logic. Every year, Audubon visits many different elementary schools, and we put on programs to help kids get an appreciation, understanding of nature. And I always like to do an oak leaf activity. I get random oak leaves, bring them into the classroom. We do this with kindergarten, yeah, kindergarten or first grade, I forget which. But each kid gets a leaf, and I say, all right, let's look for evidence. Does it look like anything has been skeletonizing the leaf? Does it look like there's any galls, any little round dots or bumps? Has something been munching from the outside in or from the inside out? And each one of these are different caterpillars that have been munching in the leaves. Like, try it. Like, tomorrow, go out, pick up an oak leaf from your yard if you can brush away the snow. You're going to see you'll never find a perfect oak leaf. They're all beaten up. They have been munched on and chewed upon, but it doesn't hurt the oak tree. Oak trees are fully adapted to have these hundreds of different kinds of species, thousands and thousands of these caterpillars on them every year. And that's exactly what baby birds need. So again, Doug Tallamy, what did he call them? He called caterpillars juicy little sausages for baby birds. They have carotenoids that birds need. Think about this. When a bird hatches, it's got about a month to grow all the feathers that it needs in order to be able to fly. And it needs specialized nutrition, and those caterpillars have it. The baby birds can't eat hard seeds or grains or anything like that, but those caterpillars are juicy. So to get a chickadee, it takes about 10,000 little caterpillars to grow a chickadee from the time it hatches to when it finally leaves the nest. So without oaks, ecosystems would collapse. Without oaks supporting, especially lepidopterans, butterflies and moths, that is, insect populations would plummet. Without those caterpillars to feed the baby birds, birds would follow the insect populations plummeting. Mammals would starve to death, especially in the winter. We'd lose pollinators. So, no jays means less oaks, less acorns, less moths, less food for birds, less birds overall. So this is basically the thesis of this program about how important jays are, and especially how important blue jays are to our personal local ecosystems that we go out and enjoy. So please be sure and attend the second part on March 11th. You're going to learn more about insects. I just kind of teased it in this program. And then make sure that you're there for the Oaks Part 3 in April, which Chris will be teaching. It's going to look at the symbiotic relationships of oaks and fungi as well. Someone asked me, do squirrels help support oak propagation? Yes, they do, but they're just not nearly as effective as jays. If it was just squirrels, it's hard to do what if science, but if jays went away, I doubt that squirrels could fill that niche, that job that the jays do. So, oh wait, I want to continue sharing because on my last slide, of course, I needed my photo credits. And there's my email. There's my phone number. There's my email. If you have questions, if you have a disagreement, if you have specialized knowledge in this field that you feel like I should have included here that I didn't, I have no ego about that. I learn so much from Audubon members every time I interact with them. So I just thank you for spending some of your precious time with me. And hopefully we can meet up sometime on another Audubon in-person program. So if you happen to run into me out there in Audubon land on any of our campuses, please come up, say hi, let me know what you thought of the program. So thank you all very, very much.